Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So, this is the recording for our next chapter in Organizational Behavior Aam1023 subject, which is conflict and negotiation. So, these are among the learning objectives. I hope that at the end of the lecture, inshallah, the students can describe the three types of conflict and the three loci of conflicts. Loci means locus, alright? And then I hope that you can outline the conflict process, contrast distributive and integrative bargaining in conflict in organization. And then I hope you can apply the 5 steps of the negotiation process, and then show how individual differences influence negotiations, describe the social factors that influence negotiations, and assess the rules and functions of third-party negotiation. Okay, let us move to the definition of conflict. So conflict primarily deals with perception. If nobody thinks there is conflict, so there is no conflict exist. So it means that conflict can be experienced in an organization through many different avenues. Conflicts can be that the goals of the individuals are incompatible, okay, or there is a difference of opinion over the interpretation of facts. So many conflicts also arise through disagreements about how people, especially at the workplace, should behave. And then when we talk about perspectives of conflict, contemporary perspectives differentiate types of conflict based on their effects. The first type is what we call as functional conflict. It supports the goals of the group and improves its performance. The second one, we call it as dysfunctional conflicts. Dysfunctional conflict hinders group performance. So in the exhibit here that you can find in exhibit 14.1, alright, in our textbook, it shows the effect of levels of conflict. I'm not going to explain it thoroughly, but above all, we can see here, we have what we call as bell curve kind of graph, okay, whereby the level of conflict can always started with low, and then we have the peak, okay, or the highest level of conflict there, and then it become low again, right? When the conflict is at the high level. Okay, so here what we can see, all right, there is in the axis X, the level of conflict. In axis Y, from bottom to up, it is the performance. So it means that if we have low level of conflict, means it is low also in terms of performance of the worker. But to certain level, if we have an amount of level of conflict, it can arise the performance as well. But towards the end, when the conflict is too high, and then the performance will become low again. Alright, so I hope that you can read this by yourself. So there are 3 situations, A, B, and also C. So we can expect that we need to have conflict in an organization, and the conflict can maybe motivate people at the workplace to work towards the conflict positively. So the level of performance will be high, alright. But to the situations of A and C, A and C in this particular graph, we can see that the level of conflict, if it is too low or too high, means it is low in terms of performance among the workers. Okay, so according to scholars, alright, there are several types of conflict, but in our textbook, alright, we can assess the focus of conflict by looking at either task, relationship, or process. So there are three categories of conflict. We have what we call as relationship conflict. Okay, it is based on interpersonal relationships, the relationship between workers, between employees and employers, and so on. They are almost always dysfunctional, all right, and are the most psychologically exhausting. And then we have the second type of conflict. We call it as task conflict. So this is relating to the context of the work, slightly reduces the extent or the level to which people collaborate, and then moderately increases the degree to which they compete, all right, with one another, with the other workers. So this has a strong negative effect on their trust, on the workers' trust among others, and then their job attitudes as well, all right. So if this type of conflict exists at low to maybe moderate levels, all right, so then this is a functional conflict that can help individuals seek clarification or maybe new ideas on how to accomplish their goals. And then the third type of conflict is what we call as process conflict. This one often about delegation of works or tasks and also roles. So process conflict occurs when there is disagreement on how the works get done among the workers. So low levels of process conflict represent functional conflict. They can become highly personalized and quickly devolve into relationship conflicts. Alright, now we move on to what we call as locus of conflict. So there are three sources of conflict. We have what we call as dyadic conflict, conflict between two people. And then we have intra-group conflict, conflict occurring within a group or among the team members, And then we have what we call as intergroup conflict, which is conflict between groups or teams in an organization. Maybe conflict between a department with another department and so on. So thinking about conflict in terms of these types and locus, it's really helpful in terms of making us realize that conflict is probably inevitable in most organizations. Therefore, it is important for us, especially the manager, alright, to manage the variables of the conflict process all along the process of doing task or doing what we call as our responsibility, okay, at the workplace. So if we look into the conflict process, which is reflected in exhibit 14.2, so we can see that there are 5 stages of the conflict process. I hope that you can read this by yourselves, alright, and each of the stages, alright, has the details that you can find and you can read in the textbook. Alright, from stage 1, alright, potential opposition or incompatibility, and then the antecedent or the factors, conditions of communication include structure, alright, and also personal variables, and the other stages until the last one, which is the stage of outcomes. Alright, increase group performance, or maybe vice versa, decrease group performance because of the conflict. Okay, so if we look into stage 1, all right, we have the explanation in our textbook, all right. So I just browse through all these slides, all right, and I hope that you can read by yourselves, all right. So stage 1, we have the potential opposition or incompatibility, and then in stage 2, we have cognition and personalization. Stage 3, we come to what we call as intentions, all right, and we have several conflict handling intentions according to the textbook, all right, from competing to collaborating, avoiding, accommodating, and also compromising. And you can find in the textbook through exhibit 14.3 the dynamic escalation of conflict, right? And then in stage 5, all right, this one is stage 4, right? So in stage 5, sorry, the dynamic escalation of conflict is in stage 4, right? And then in stage 5, we come to what we call as outcomes, whether the outcomes are those we desired or the outcomes that we really don't want it to be, but it happened, all right, positive or negative outcome. So I hope that you can read this by yourself, okay, in the textbook. Okay, so now we move to managing conflict. If managers recognize that in some situations conflict can be beneficial, conflict can be come with positive outcomes, so they can encourage people to challenge the system and develop fresh ideas. We have conflict, but through the conflict we can get good outcomes. We can develop fresh ideas and so on. So if we look into the bell curve graph in the previous slide, okay, we can see that this is the way how we want to get the position B, isn't it? Okay, whereby in that sense we have conflict, not too low, not too high, but we can stir up good kind of performance among the workers. So conflict management is the use of resolution and the use of stimulation techniques to achieve the desired level of conflict in the organization. So there are several domains that can be targeted. Maybe we look into strategy, we look into function, and also the worker themselves. All right, and then to manage conflict, all right, we need to minimize what we call as counterproductive conflict. So counterproductive conflict can be minimized. How? By recognize when there really is a disagreement. So we need to encourage open, frank discussion which focused on interest of the workers under our supervision, and then have opposing groups pick important issues and work for mutual satisfaction. No problem to have disagreement, but at the end of the process, we hope that everybody will have their own kind of satisfaction, or what we call as mutual satisfaction. Okay, now we move to cultural influences. All right, so there are numerous global implications, all right, in the area of conflict, as different cultures will view conflict through unique lenses. For example, maybe in US, managers are more likely to use what we call as competing tactics, whereas Japanese managers, or maybe Korean, or maybe Asian managers will tend toward what we call as compromise and also avoidance of any occurrence of conflict. Okay, next we move to negotiation. What is negotiation? Negotiation, or maybe what we call as bargaining, is a process where the people involved work on creating a deal that is mutually beneficial. So two or more parties exchange goods or services and then they attempt to agree on the exchange rate for them. As reflected in Exhibit 14.4, so this is distributive versus integrative bargaining. So it means that there are two main bargaining approaches. We call them as distributive and also integrative. So distributive bargaining seeks to divide up a fixed amount of resources and often creates what we call as a win or a lose situation. Integrative bargaining, on the other hand, seeks one or more settlements that can create a win-win situation for all parties involved in a conflict. Alright, so you can read this by yourself. We have the characteristics of bargaining. Okay, we have goal, motivation, focus, and so on. And then how distributive bargaining and integrative bargaining different between each other. Okay, so in Exhibit 14.5, alright, we can look how it depicts distributive bargaining. So each negotiator has a target point which defines his goals, and a resistance point that marks the lowest acceptable outcome. So the area between these points is the settlement range in which both parties' goals can be met. And then when we talk about integrative bargaining, a win-win solution is possible, alright? But we need to know that both parties must be open with information and candid about their concerns, and then both parties must be sensitive regarding the other's needs. Both parties must be able to trust each other. They are opposing each other, but in the same time they must trust each other. And then both parties must be willing to be flexible in terms of working towards a solution of a conflict. So this is the negotiation process in Exhibit 14.6, and it is depicted in 5 steps, starting from preparation and planning, and then definition of ground rules, clarification and justification, and then bargaining and problem solving, and then closure and implementation. Okay, and then now we move to the next slide. All right, individual difference in negotiation effectiveness. So according to scholars, 4 factors influence how effectively individuals negotiate. Among the 4 factors, all right, we start with personality, and then mood and emotions, culture, and also gender. So many individual differences are interwoven in the negotiation process and impact the effectiveness of the outcomes. For example, personality traits will impact outcomes, as extroverts tend to be weaker at negotiation because they will want people to like them. So intelligence is not an indicator of effective negotiation skills. So I hope that you can read the explanation and elaboration about the other effectiveness in terms of moods and emotions, culture and race, and also gender. Okay, next, negotiating in a social context. To really understand negotiations in practice, we have to consider the social factors of what we call as reputation and also relationships. So reputation is the way people think and talk about you. Having a reputation for being trustworthy matters in negotiations. What characteristics help a person develop a trustworthy reputation? It is a combination of competence and also integrity. So the social interpersonal component of relationships with repeated negotiations. With repeated negotiations means that individuals go beyond valuing what is simply good for themselves and instead start to think about what is best for the other workers or the other party, and also the relationship as a whole. Okay, now we move to third party negotiations. Alright, so when it is impossible maybe to reach an agreement between two parties through direct negotiations, so is there any solution? Yes, there's a solution. So it may be necessary for both of the parties in which having conflict and they cannot resolve it, so it may be necessary for them to turn to a third party to assist finding a solution. So there are three basic third party roles. Orang ketiga kan, we call them as mediator or arbitrator and also conciliator. What are the differences between these three third party roles? Okay, a mediator is a neutral third party, neutral, who facilitates a negotiated solution by using what we call as reasoning, persuasion, and suggestions, alright, for alternatives. And then the second one is arbitrator. Okay, it is a third party to a negotiation who has the authority to dictate an agreement. The power is in their hands, alright, the arbitrator. And then the third category is conciliator. Conciliator is a trusted third party who provides an informal communication link between the negotiator and also the opponent. Alright, so that's the end of the lecture, the explanation of this particular topic, alright, that related to conflict and negotiation. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.